Have you ever wanted to play a game with 13 endings and then get super confused about what you've actually done in each timeline? Great! Also, this game is a little more story driven with basically no gameplay, so this is going to be a little more story recap based than my usual videos, so apologies if I misexplain the story or skip out on your favorite section. This game was way more visual novel than I thought it was going to be, and I'll be here all day if I get too far into the weeds. Hope you enjoy the video. There are quite a few things that are cool about Beacon Pines though. First off, the story is being told by an outside observer's perspective through a storybook. So, when we get into a future mechanic, the storybook will be kind of skipped through to get around to the important parts of the story. But what is Beacon Pines? Well, Beacon Pines is the name of the town that the story is going to be taking place in, and on the outskirt of that town, we see our main character, who we're going to be following through the game, named Luca. Now, Luca is here standing at his father's grave mourning. But we don't really have that much time to mourn because we very quickly get interrupted by our best friend Rollo. Rollo gives us, the player, some interesting information. We learn that this was a tradition that Luca always used to do with his mom, but his mom has gone missing. This Luca guy really can't catch a break. As we start walking away from the grave site, we walk through some dandelions and earn a charm called Tickle. Now, this will be important for later, but we do earn our first achievement, a charmed life, right here. So Rollo came to get us because he's found the perfect way for us to start our summer. But he can't tell us right here. He wants to wait until we're safe in our treehouse. So before we can do that, we need to say goodbye to our grandmother and let her know where we're going. So let's do that real quick. Once we're inside the house, we find our second charm. There are actually quite a few charms hidden around the world, and these are what we're going to be needing to progress further in the story. So it's good to find them, but we're not going to need to include every single one in the video. After we finish poking around the house, we head outside to meet with Luca's grandmother, and we reach our first turning point of the game. Now, this is where those charms come in handy. I mentioned this game has 13 endings at the beginning of the game, and this is what causes that. There are all of these little branching paths we can take throughout the story. Some of them will dead end right away, and some of them branch out much further. But in order to reach each of these passages, we're going to need to pick up these different charms and use them in the appropriate situations. I really like the mechanic where we can return back to this page of the book at any time and go make a different choice at any time, but it is a little weird to play like a timeline manipulation game where your main character doesn't actually know what's occurring in the other timelines. And as we meet back up with Rollo, he does his very best Barry impression as he runs as fast as he can into the distance ahead of us. As we enter the actual town of Beacon Pines, we get another little bit of backstory. Beacon Pines was originally a small mining town and eventually became the home of Sharper Valentine's fertilizer company. And that went well and good for about 30 years until there was some sort of foul harvest that killed a lot of the crops, and things have never been the same. Sharper Valentine also died during that foul harvest, so things are a little bit in decay. But small town vibes, you know, we do get to meet up with the mayor just out about in town. We also meet with a guy named William Kerr, who is the CEO of a company called Perennial Harvest, another fertilizer company who has come to town recently trying to help revitalize the town's economy. He also tells us that everybody in town is preparing for some sort of big festival, so surely there won't be some sort of dramatic reveal there. We also meet with the employees of Perennial Harvest, a large group of red pandas who will be referred to as the clipboards throughout the story. We get back on the main quest to reach the treehouse, and then we immediately get distracted when we see a little dream sequence we can go into. Here we can go into a memory Luca has with his father where we were sitting at this lake fishing, and now we can use the different charms we've collected as bait to catch kinda fish, not really. But we don't have all of the bait options that we need, so we can come back later. We finally arrive at the treehouse and see that we actually have a pretty sweet setup going here. We finally learn Rollo's top secret plan that he wants to start out our summer with. The old Valentine warehouse that used to be used to construct all of that fertilizer has been abandoned, but last night he noticed that it was glowing, so of course we're gonna have to investigate. And Luca's all in, because it might be related to his mom disappearing. So now we get to take a look at the other part of the town that has a bunch more people to talk to. The first cool character is this lady who sits on a bench and basically tells us what's about to happen with our story in vague terms. It's a pretty cute nod. We find a big watermelon with a sign that says no touching, so naturally we go ahead and hit it and earn achievement number 2, play that funky music. And we meet up with another side character in the game named Dawn, who I'm not really going to include in the rest of this video, but she does feel kind of important, more so than a lot of the other side characters. But before we can leave town and head out to the warehouse, we have to pass by Roxy, the second turning point of the game. It's really interesting how the game kind of gatekeeps you into discovering the stories in the order that it wants you to, because we don't have a correct option that would get us to another state right now, so we're kind of locked into one line for the moment. So we go with the one dialogue option that we have, and this one unfortunately ends with Rollo getting dragged off by his sister Roxy to go work on some chores, and we'll have to do the investigating on our own. On our way though, we first get stopped by this guy named Mr. Nuncreed, who just wants to say that everybody seems to be loving our Grand's jam and we should drop some by when we get the chance. Will do. Finally, we arrive at the grounds for the fertilizer plant, but there is an electric fence that we'll need to unshockify and crawl through the hole to get into the actual plant area. When we get up to the plant, we see that Rollo was absolutely correct. There is definitely some sort of activity going on here. We walk up and press our ear to the door, and we definitely hear movement inside, which is confirmed when the door swings open and a big person wearing a yellow hazmat suit. They come outside and immediately see us, so they grab us and pull us back inside the factory. And that's where this branch of the story ends, which doesn't seem quite right. That wasn't enough content for a game, so I guess let's jump back to another point and redo something. Thankfully, we learned a handy word from that person in the hazmat suit that allows us to free Rollo and we can flee Roxy and head to the fertilizer plant, just the two of us. In this timeline, Rollo bumps into a guy named Solomon, another boy in the town who just seems a little bit off. Surely that won't be anything ever. This time we arrive at the plant and Rollo immediately starts digging in the dumpster, which is actually pretty good for us because he ends up pulling out 2 walkie-talkies. Why did they throw away 2 perfectly good phones? I don't know, but we've got them now. But a slight change in this timeline comes when we hear somebody walking outside, so we both hop in the dumpster. And we see what the hazmat suit wearing person was carrying when they drop a suspiciously body-shaped bag on top of us. And this bag of garbage has a name tag that says Dr. Prescott Deep Engineering, so it's probably a body. Now that we've got our fingerprints all over this body bag, we decide it's time to flee the scene, so we'd go separately with Rollo running first because he's clearly much faster than us. The next morning we are eating breakfast with Gran when she gets a phone call and she says to start gathering folks. She gives us a quick interrogation about if we got up to anything yesterday, which of course we deny. She tells us to stay inside the house no matter what today, do not leave before she heads out the door. But she also stops before she heads out to scold us for leaving the icebox open yesterday. We earned the achievement Born in a Barn, which was pretty funny to be fair. We very quickly get interrupted with a knock on the door though, and it turns out that it's actually Roxy, who's coming to ask if we've seen Rollo because he didn't come home last night, which is pretty concerning because he left first. We once again don't admit to any of the stuff that we did yesterday, but there's one place we can look. Maybe he'll be at the library? When we get to the library, we take a quick browse around all of the sections. Rollo isn't here, and nobody knows anything about where he is, but at least we earn achievement number 4, Nerd, for looking at all of the sections in the library. Kinda uncalled for. When we leave the library, we encounter a new kid in town named Beck. We've never seen Beck around here before. Apparently Beck's family moves around pretty often, and her mom just got a job at Perennial Harvest, so that's why she's here. We take Beck with us to go re-investigate the fertilizer plant, but they've upped their security a little bit and we can't sneak in through the hole in the fence anymore, but we do find a side path with some property of Valentine fertilizer stuff with it. We also see that there's some sort of chemical on the ground that we decide to poke with a dead branch. The branch immediately flowers with bright pink petals, and then just as quickly it dies in Beck's hands again. So there's some pretty dangerous stuff at work here. While we're messing around poking this puddle with the stick, 2 local bullies walk up. To be honest with you, Tish and Iggy might be the most ominous pair in gaming history. So of course when dealing with bullies, you go into a small options menu where you have 2 different choices to make. We go with Strange first as our response. Strange results in Luca pushing Iggy straight into the big puddle of goop that we just saw absolutely ravage that branch. So things are gonna get a little weird from here. Iggy very rapidly starts to transform, and seeing this, Iggy runs away. So I guess that's a problem for later. As we chase after Iggy, we run into William Kerr, who tells us that Rollo was just found and is currently back at home resting up. So I guess that's mystery solved then? We return home and we are prepared to face Gran's wrath, as she explicitly told us not to leave the house, but she doesn't seem to be back yet, so maybe we're safe. We slip into bed and we go into a small dream sequence. And when I say dream sequence, that's kind of loose. Once again, there's no images here, it's all descriptions. You do this a couple times in the game, mostly being like flashbacks to Luca's memories with his parents. So sorry if this is your favorite part of the game, but I'm gonna have to skip over these because it's just dialogue that doesn't really impact the actual story of the game. Again, I'm gonna be skipping quite a bit of the background stuff, so really I would recommend playing this game if you want to get deeper into like all of the characters' stories. Back to the action, we get awoken by the sound of that walkie-talkie we found going off over and over again. It's the voice of Rollo coming out, crying out for us. Rollo refers to being down here and says someone grabbed him, someone wearing a hazmat suit. But he's underground, so the things he's saying are a little staticky and we can't fully understand every single word. The static continues to get worse and worse, and Rollo is definitely saying something about mission control and the treehouse. So I guess he wants us to go visit the treehouse. Maybe there's something that we need there. Or maybe we could use the radio in the treehouse to contact him. Rollo's a genius. Okay, let's go to the treehouse. However, when we woke up to take that phone call, Gran was still suspiciously absent, and we see why when we leave the house. We see that Gran is walking with 2 other members of the town, Mr. Tolliver and Miss Fratelli, and they seem to have some sort of plot going on. We learn that Mr. Tolliver was the one that gave Gran the phone call this morning, so that is somewhat related to whatever plan they have going on. They also mention that they're going to reconvene after the festival, so I guess maybe something big is happening there? We arrive at the treehouse and start the process of trying to recontact Rollo with the more powerful radio, and then suddenly we see something out of the corner of our eye. A ball gets kicked out of the corner. Who's in here with us? It turns out that Iggy fled here after the whole incident down with the wastewater, and things aren't going super well for Iggy. He mentioned something about being chased? Iggy starts to explain that someone was chasing him all the way through Weep Woods, so he came here to hide out. And then we finally get contact with Rollo, who tells us that we misunderstood his message. He was saying the treehouse isn't safe because someone was on their way here. And now we're here. What's gonna happen next? Well, it turns out that William Kerr and all of those red pandas from Perennial Harvest have been hunting Iggy down since the incident this afternoon, and now they've got us cornered on top of our treehouse. What do they want with us? I don't know. The only real information that we can get out of Kerr is that he does admit that he knows where Rollo is. He's safe and sound, but not at home. He is being kept somewhere. We make another choice, but we don't quite have the options that we need here, and we get descended down upon by all of those red pandas. So this is where this chapter comes to a dead end. Let's go somewhere else. We go back to the situation with Iggy initially, and we take the less violent option. So this time we won't have to deal with Iggy getting transformed. But this ending isn't super great either. As we leave the area with the fertilizer plant, we run into Mr. Nuncreed again. And we have another choice, but only one option. We decide to tell Mr. Nuncreed the truth about everything that's been going on. And things don't go super well. We mentioned that we saw a name tag that said Deep Engineering, and Mr. Nuncreed isn't a super big fan of that, and something kind of flips inside of him. Mr. Nuncreed stuffs us inside of the nearby telephone booth before tapping on some of the paneling, and the floor disappears beneath us as we fall down deep below, and this chapter is also another dead end. Okay, let's try something else. We go back to where we were grabbed by that person in the hazmat suit initially, but this time instead of just giving in and being pulled inside of the factory, we grab a nearby tile and hit the person on the head with it, breaking their mask, and we are able to run away back home. I guess that's something, but surely they'll come after us, right? No? Okay. Back at breakfast the next day, Gran asks us to go around town and deliver some of her jam to different people, so let's go ahead and do that. Rollo meets us outside asking for all of the details about what went down at the Valentine plant, but we're in the middle of a task right now, so we ask him to meet us at the Treehouse later tonight. Our first jam delivery goes to Miss Fratelli, and at the diner, which has been closed up to this point, we can look at a photo on the wall and go into our kind of flashback memory with our mother. In this one, we're working at the diner where we're taking people's orders and then constructing different meals for them. Again, we don't have all of the necessary tools available, so we'll come back to this in a little bit. Our next jam delivery goes to Mr. Tolliver, and it's a little interesting that these jam deliveries are all going to the people that Gran seems to be conspiring with. Something fishy's going on here, and Mr. Tolliver is kind of a weird dude. We drop off the final jam delivery to Mr. Nuncreed and we're free to go. Obviously, we don't know what he's up to in this timeline, so we can't really call him out on anything. Okay, now that we've finished our jam delivery, we can go ahead and meet back up with Rollo, except here comes Beck. We haven't met Beck in this timeline yet, and Beck needs us to come do them a little favor. So with Beck just moving here, Beck's parents have been encouraging her to go out and make some new friends. So Beck grabbed the first person they saw on the street to come talk to their parents and say that they are best friends. And that just happened to be us. So now we're going to be going over to Beck's house for dinner tonight. The main things that come out of this dinner are learning that Luca's father actually died at the fertilizer plant in some sort of big accident 6 years ago, and Beck's mother is new in town because she just got hired by Perennial Harvest to be the new head of Deep Engineering. Where have we heard that before? After dinner, we're about to head over to the treehouse when we get to make another decision, and this one's kind of weird because it's more act of God-y. We get to decide if it starts storming or not. We go with, sure, let the storm come first. We get our first really big emotional scene with Beck here, where Beck screams out the window about how mad she is that she's had to move around so much and how much she wishes she could just stay in one place. After the storm ends, we decide to leave and start making our way towards the treehouse before we get interrupted by Dawn once again. Dawn actually has some information for us. The kid that we ran into before, Solomon, is the new heir to the Valentine fortune, despite not being a direct descendant. Weird. We finally arrive at the treehouse and find that Rollo isn't super pleased with us, which makes a little bit of sense because we are much later than we planned to be originally. Rollo is not super appreciative of the fact that we were hanging out with a new person that we just met when we were supposed to be meeting up with them, which is fair enough, but also, to be fair, the rain did hold us up quite a bit. After that, Rollo makes some pretty mean comments, basically making fun of us for our dad being dead, which I know that he's supposed to be like 12 and, it's just something that kids say when they don't really mean it, but this does feel kind of out of left field as far as all of the other dialogue this game has had so far. After our big fight with Rollo, we basically spend the next day moping around our house, and Gran tries to get us out, but we pretty much just sit around the house all day. Eventually, Gran comes in and tells us that we should make up with Rollo because what he said doesn't really matter because he didn't mean it, and we should go meet up with him at the festival. When we leave to start heading for the festival though, we get stopped by Roxy, who has been given a little riddle to give us from Rollo, so now we need to go find some place that definitely isn't the library. Just kidding, it was the library, and we earn the achievement Riddle Me This for going and finding the first riddle. And when I say first riddle, that's because there's a couple different places we're going to need to stop by for this quest. This is kind of fun. It gives a purpose to some of the town NPCs that we don't really need to talk to other than this quest. Eventually, once we've gone through every step of the quest, we come out and meet Rollo, who gives us a balloon and apologizes for all of the things that he said. So we're pretty much back to square one, and we decide to head over to the treehouse to go hang out for the rest of the day. On our way to the treehouse, Rollo gives us a note that Gran apparently gave him, and it says some pretty cryptic stuff, apologizing for what's about to happen and she never meant to hurt us. Pretty weird stuff. I guess we'll ask her about it when we go home tonight. So we head up to the treehouse and hang out for the rest of the day. Rollo's a little bit upset about missing out on the festival, but we say there's always next year. Here's where the narrator cuts in to say sadly this is untrue, and a distant rumble shakes the treehouse. So what's this gonna be? Well, a giant ice storm completely encases us in ice? I really did not see this coming. This was a real sit up in the chair and like what just happened kind of moment. We do earn the next achievement, the Big Chill though, but wow, this is some crazy stuff. Alright, so maybe we can figure out what all of that ice is about if we go back and choose to have the storm break, and we can head straight over to Rollo. This time, however, instead of getting the conversation with Dawn, we see that there is a mysterious meeting going on between Heiress Valentine and our grandmother. She appears to be wearing one of those hazmat suits that we've been seeing around, and this adds a lot of questions to the mix. So with possibilities swirling in our head, we go ahead and bring Beck back to Mission Control to meet up with Rollo, and he's much less mad tonight. So now in this timeline, we can finally give Rollo the recap of what happened at Valentine Fertilizer, including the man grabbing us and trying to pull us into the factory. The next day, Rollo and Beck return to our house, and it's time for us to start investigating this mystery that's going on with Gran. The first thing we choose to investigate is this locked cabinet that was the only thing Gran brought with her when she moved in. And, you know, just like all great movies, we happen to find the secret entrance to Gran's big hideout as Beck accidentally touches a teacup, and the cabinet slides open to reveal a staircase that definitely wasn't there before. Awesome stuff. So downstairs is classic secret hideout stuff, and the first thing we take a look at is the jars of jam that Gran has been preparing. But inside, not quite just jam, there's actually slips of paper, so we've actually been delivering secret messages to other members of Gran's conspiracy group, maybe? We also find some medical files that our father kept on hand from around the time of that great disastrous harvest. They seem to be showing some sort of illness people were catching and spreading around that was unlike anything else ever seen before. Creepy. There also appears to be some explosives and a map pointing towards the fountain in the center of town. And there seems to be some implications that it might be going kaboom around the time of the big festival. Uh-oh. Right as we're getting into the midst of figuring out what Gran is up to, we hear some footsteps creaking above us, and they start to walk down the staircase as well. Rollo, being the extremely brave boy that he is, tackles this person to the ground. Now, this could have been Gran, and Gran's pretty old. This could have been a pretty bad situation. But luckily for us, it was only that weirdo Mr. Tolliver. Why was he trying to creep into this secret base though? So now we have a couple different choices on how we run the interrogation on Mr. Tolliver. We decide to go with the hard way first, which is Rollo's method. Rollo accuses Mr. Tolliver of attempting to blow up the festival, and this is kind of overwhelming. He says that Gran is just attempting to blow up the source. What's the source? No idea, because Mr. Tolliver promptly passes out. Guess the hard method was a little bit too intense for him. So with Mr. Tolliver tied up and asleep in the basement, we decide to head out to the local library to do some research on the source. Why did we not do anything with him? Who's to say? So we go to the library to read through some of the references, and Beck happens to be looking at obituaries when she puts her finger down right on the name J. Hartford, who died a couple years ago. And this is another one of those super convenient things that happen, because J. Hartford happens to be the name of Luca's grandmother. And it also says she was survived by E. Harper, which is Luca's mother's name. So there's another weird thing going on here, but we didn't really find it through any skill. It was just another random story occurrence, which is kind of frustrating. After that, we return home to go deal with Mr. Tolliver in the basement, but we find that Gran is asleep in front of the fire and she's beat us home. So maybe she doesn't know? Well, it actually turns out that Mr. Tolliver seems to have escaped somehow, but maybe Gran doesn't know and we can just go to sleep. But we actually spent all day in the library, so Luca hasn't been able to eat anything today, so he decides to go ahead and help himself to some of the jam jars. But when we make our way up the stairs, we find that those jam jars were actually spiked and seem to be putting Luca straight to sleep. This is also never explained. Why did they do that? I don't know. But we once again quite suspiciously wake up back in bed on the day of the festival, so I guess let's try to stop whatever Gran was plotting. When we arrive at the festival, Mr. Kerr is giving a big speech about how happy he is to have arrived at our little town and to be here on the cusp of greatness as we move into the future. But just as Mr. Kerr is finishing up his speech, everything once again becomes completely encased in ice. And noticeably, Gran is not at this event, so I guess whatever she's doing is related to this ice. So we go back to the interrogation and decide to go with good cop, chill cop. This is Luca's method. Basically, we go ahead and release Mr. Tolliver and hope that he's going to tell us everything that he knows, but instead he runs upstairs and locks us in the basement, and that's game over. Awesome. So instead of that, we go with the third and final option, Sly Cop, where Beck convinces Mr. Tolliver that she was actually sent to come help clean up this mess with him, and he doesn't really need to be here because she can take care of it on her own. And since Mr. Tolliver thinks that Beck is in on whatever their big plot is, he lets her know that he overheard a secret passphrase, Underground Secrets, over the radio last night, so we can look into that as well. Up to this point, Rollo hasn't been shown off in the best light, but surprisingly quickly, he converts Underground Secrets into Nuncreed's drugstore, so that's where we can head next. On our way, we return to that melon and kick it to earn the achievement Melon Kicker. I don't know what I did differently this time, I was just kind of hitting the button. When we arrive at Nuncreed's drugstore, we find that boy Solomon hanging out outside with a big bag of black licorice. He makes some weird comments that aren't super important to us right now. There's nothing else going on around here, but our eyes are drawn to the telephone booth. Why? It was recently installed in town and we've never seen anyone other than Mr. Nuncreed use it, but we know from prior experience where this is gonna lead. We pile into the telephone booth before the floor drops out and leads us to a secret lab type room with a bunch of little tunnels that lead to different places around the city, but we don't really know where these tunnels actually lead. But we don't have very long to ponder what's at the other end of these tunnels, as we find that Mr. Nuncreed comes flying out of one of them and is quite surprised to see us there. Mr. Nuncreed gives us some background story about the relationship between him and Luca's father. Apparently, Sharper Valentine came with some sort of big offer for the two of them. Our father refused and Mr. Nuncreed accepted, and that's how he's mixed up in this whole mess. We tell Mr. Nuncreed that as much as he wanted to keep us and our Gran out of this, she has been scheming right under his nose, and he seems to understand exactly what that means. Mr. Nuncreed tells us to run away, and he activates one of the tubes and hops in, so naturally we're gonna go ahead and follow him, because he didn't shut it off after he went through. On the other end of the tube, we feel like we didn't go very far, but we've ended up in a completely snowy wasteland, and immediately upon spawning in, I feel like this area looks pretty familiar. And as we see the iced over town hall area, we enter in and see Gran is holding a torch over a big hole where the fountain in the middle of town used to be, as Mr. Nuncreed approaches and tries to calm her down. Gran has some very harsh words to say and tells us that if it weren't for Mr. Nuncreed's actions, our father might still be alive. Don't really know how she would know that though. Despite all of Mr. Nuncreed's pleading with her, Gran decides to drop the torch directly into that big hole. So now it's time to see what that means. A sharp blue light fires out of the center of the hole, and everything suddenly becomes completely encased in ice. So obviously this isn't the correct path, but now we know where the ice is coming from and we can try to stop it. But we can't go right back to that. Instead, we have to return to the reality where Iggy fell into the goo and we're being surrounded by the clipboards. This time we are going to be fleeing back out into the woods and attempting to run away, and this is much more successful than trying to fight. Eventually we manage to run so far away that we come back to this exact spot where everything is completely encased in ice and snow. That's a weird coincidence. Surely nothing weird is going to happen here. So naturally, the boys coming into a town that's an exact replica of the one that they just came from, but it completely encased in ice, they decide that this is their town that has been completely destroyed. And they decide that it's not worth continuing right now. They decide to sit down for the night and maybe try again tomorrow. But at some point in the middle of the night, a figure we've never seen before approaches the two boys while they're sleeping. So the best way that I think I can describe Nat is like a planeswalker, I guess, kind of existing outside of the actual timeline of the game. But that's a pretty big benefit for us because Nat is in a position to explain to us what this place is exactly. It looks exactly like Beacon Pines, but we just came from Beacon Pines. And the answer is pretty crazy. We both grew up in this Beacon Pines, but after that foul crop year, Perennial Harvest decided to set up a replica town down to the extremely minute details that would serve as our new home as this one became covered in ice. Now, the reason, we don't really understand. But this is the original Beacon Pines, and the one that we've been living in is a complete replica. Hearing this, Luca only has one thing on his mind. His father's grave has been left here, while his tree has been moved to the new replica Beacon Pines. Pretty sad. So now that Nat has informed us about this source in the middle of town, we have something to get back at Perennial Harvest with. So it's time to go disrupt the source. And it turns out that Iggy has just the thing to disrupt the source with, because in this original Beacon Pines, Iggy hid some fireworks that he can now dig up to take with us. When we finally get to the source, Mr. Kerr finally catches up to us, and it's kind of weird it took so long considering they have those super quick tubes that could be used to catch up with us. And Iggy, not one to be threatened, decided to go ahead and throw a firework down into the source hole, but Mr. Kerr gets a little bit frustrated and decides to attack Iggy, knocking them both into the hole. So Iggy decides to make a noble sacrifice and drop himself and Kerr into the pit, but we are the ones that will ultimately make the decision, and first we decide to go with refusing that option. Don't think too closely about how 12-year-old Iggy was able to hold onto the side of the pit with Kerr dangling off of him, but we manage to call back the clipboards who come and rescue Mr. Kerr, and this is where this pathway ends. A pretty swift end where we betrayed Iggy for no real good reason. So we take a trip back and decide to accept Iggy's offer and allow Iggy to drop directly into the pit with his big box of fireworks and Mr. Kerr. So naturally, when that box of fireworks hits the bottom, they all go off and we get a nice light show. Nat returns and tells us that we need to get out of here, but Iggy's sacrifice just saved the town. But this ending doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that point is super driven home when it switches back to the book format, and we're informed that this story will continue in Beacon Pines 2 Pines Harder, Revenge Served Cold. So this is nothing. This is another dead end. Let's go back again. We go back to the point when Gran was about to drop the big torch into the source, and we decide to hum instead of cry. And this kind of snaps Gran out of it. In fact, Gran decides to join in Luca's humming, and calls Luca Buckaroo, which is very unusual because only two people call Luca Buckaroo, his mother and his father. And here's where we get the grand reveal that Gran was actually Luca's mother this whole time. But how could that be? She disappeared. We'll find out in a little bit, but the important thing for right now is that Luca's mother has decided the way to stop Perennial Harvest is with bringing out the truth, not actually setting off the source. Even though she thought that was going to be the best option, it wouldn't work out super great for us. We jump out of the story for a minute and go back 7 months ago when we learn that Eleanor Van Horn, Luca's mother, tried to break into the deep engineering wing of Perennial Harvest. And she actually succeeded, except she was captured. So this is how she ended up with the super aging effect that she has now. With a new fighting spirit instilled in Luca's mother, we show up at the Perennial Harvest Grand Ball Festival thing, and Luca's mother decides to try to confront Mr. Kerr by challenging Perennial Harvest, the thing she's been trying to do this whole time, except she kinda gets shot down. But following that big outburst, Eleanor's surprise reveal kind of gets overshadowed by another reveal. Solomon, that boy that we've spoke to a couple times throughout the story, steps out of the crowd and appears to be commanding Mr. Kerr. This is a pretty weird thing to happen based on what we've seen so far in the different branches. It turns out that Solomon is actually a de-aged version of Sharper Valentine, and now he has come back to retake over the town that he made famous and grew from nothing. And in front of everyone, he takes the potion and transforms, and for some reason his suit grows with him. This was not annoying, it shouldn't have been, but it did. It annoyed me a lot. So Sharper Valentine announces that his big plan is to take over the town once again, and no one's gonna fight him on it even though he's revealed his big plans, because the clipboards have been gathering data on everybody in the town and he knows what they fear most. So he's back in charge. So this is back to Sharper Valentine's Beacon Pines, and the fertilizer industry is once again booming. Beacon Pines becomes a super successful town, and everybody just accepts that Sharper Valentine is in charge. This is kind of a weird branch that nobody would try anything from this point, but whatever. So now it's time to go all the way back to that timeline where we told the truth to Mr. Nuncreed, but this time we lie to him and run away immediately. And luckily for us, this gives us another shot at the fishing minigame where we've now collected all of the necessary bait types and we can earn the achievement Agile Angler. So Rollo is still missing in this timeline, so we go back to the treehouse to kind of get our head together when suddenly a giant figure enters the treehouse. But it's Rollo, just much bigger than before Rollo. Huh. So face to face, Rollo confirms what we already knew. He was captured and dragged down to the labs below. But now we learn that he was fed some of that rapid aging stuff and he's become a huge old boy. Another new feature of Rollo's size is his super strength, because he was able to smash his way out of his cage. Okay, it makes sense that Iggy was holding that guy up before. After that, we get another surprise entrant to the treehouse. Beck is here, and in this timeline, Beck hasn't met Rollo yet, so she gets introduced to giant Rollo. Beck has come over in kind of a panic because she used a radio in her house to listen in on some walkie-talkie conversations between Mr. Kerr and someone called the Founder, who seems to be at the base of everything, and we know from other timelines that that must be Solomon. But the real issue here is that Beck knows that her mom works in the deep engineering lab, and they're talking specifically about Beck's mother, being that if she can't finish the work that's set out in front of her by the time of the festival, they're gonna need to tie up some loose ends, especially if she isn't fully committed to Perennial Harvest. So it seems like Beck's mother is being held captive, and we need to break into Perennial Harvest to get her out, so it's heistin' time. So we go around town and collect a few of the local townsfolk that have some issues with Perennial Harvest to hopefully have them help us out. So when heist time happens, we have big adult man Rollo say that he has a delivery for the Founder and walk a suspiciously sized box right up to the front door. Iggy and Tish set off a firework-based distraction that allows us to slip even deeper inside of Perennial Harvest's base. And now that we're inside, Rollo and Beck can go into deep engineering to rescue Beck's mom while we go and check out the Founder's office. As we approach the Founder's office, we find that Solomon is in here for some reason, which doesn't make any sense to Luca in this timeline. So Solomon must have been kidnapped, right? I guess he can come along for the rest of our little raid. And raid we will. We have such high-tech advancements to break into the Founder's office, such as having Beck's mom smash the electrical circuit outside with a shovel. That'll probably work just fine. Yeah, that'll do. So now that Luca is inside of the Founder's office, which conveniently has access to all of the control panels, we can open up the route for the others to get into the deep engineering lab. And a distraction from Roxy and Fitz helps distract Mr. Kerr as well while all of this is going on. So with Luca on the control panel, Beck and Rollo manage to make it into Nellie's office, and Nellie's a little concerned about Beck's adult man friend until she realized that he has all the signs of somebody aged up by the chemicals she's been working with. She was under the impression that it was only being tested on plants, which makes sense because it can rapidly increase the aging of plants, which caused the foul harvest so many years ago. So that kind of ties out. So while Nellie was working on the new formula that is going to be used by Solomon very shortly, she realized that Dr. Prescott, the person in the role before her, had actually figured out the method to reverse the aging, but he got cold feet, which is probably why he was eliminated. The gang fully reunites in the Founder's office, but with the help of Solomon, Kerr, and all of the clipboards manage to make it into the office as well, and we are surrounded and pretty much outnumbered. So in this timeline, we get the big reveal that Sharper Valentine is Solomon right here. Kerr goes to hand the potion over to Solomon, but Rollo is fast enough to grab it out of his hands before the pass can be made. We play keep away for a little bit, and it eventually ends with Beck cornered with the vial behind her back, but Sharper manages to convince Beck to hand the potion back over. It really feels like Beck betrayed us and we've lost. Surely nothing happened to that potion behind Beck's back though. All the bad guys leave and we remain locked in the Founder's office, which seems like an interesting choice. But here is where Nellie tells Luca about the incident with his mother in this timeline. She was rapidly aged up by Dr. Prescott, but at the last moment, Dr. Prescott got cold feet and released her. But just when it seems like all is lost and we're gonna miss out on the rest of the festival and the big reveal with Sharper, we learn that Gran, Miss Fratelli, and Mr. Tolliver had a plan cooking on their own. They busted into the founder's office using all those explosives they had saved from before in an attempt to rescue Rollo. So they were up to some good stuff after all, even though it kinda went backwards in a couple different timelines. So now we can emerge out into the festival just as Sharper is downing his potion with the added ingredients. So Beck had 3 different things that she could spike the potion with while it was behind her back, things that were on Sharper's desk. In the first option we went with, Beck mixed the potion with some whiskey, which causes Sharper to explode upon drinking it. This is good for us because we earn the achievement Pop Goes the Weasel, and everybody in town laughs and then goes about their day. This is a really weird ending, but you know, the whole game is weird endings, so it's cool. In the second ending we go with, Beck managed to mix the potion with some ashes from a nearby ashtray, and Sharper just turns to ash and blows away in the wind. Another kinda weird ending. And finally we get the real canon ending of the story, where Beck mixed the potion with her unlucky coin that always gives the wrong result, and Sharper is returned to baby state, and as everybody knows, babies can't be evil, so Sharper is no more. So after that we go into the epilogue of the game. Yeah, seriously, that was the real ending of this game. The bad guy turned into a baby. Great stuff. We skip ahead to the next summer, and we get to talk to all of the characters that we had been introduced to up to this point, other than Sharper, obviously. It's really cool, honestly, to go talk to all of the people after we've gone through the struggle with Perennial Harvest. And some of the red pandas decided to stick around, so they still look pretty cool. And we also get a cool little segment where Iggy and Tish have decided to be friends with us and hang out at the Treehouse. In this post-game epilogue world, we can return to the diner one more time and finish up all of the remaining customers' requests to earn the achievement Yes Chef. And finally, the game ends with us returning back to the original Beacon Pines and our father's grave to plant him a new tree. He really loved that old tree that was above his grave, but it's gonna be pretty difficult to move that back from where it is now. So let's start a new tradition and we can start visiting again every year. So with the epilogue completed, the book closes and we earn the achievement Close the Book, and we can officially say we've done everything in Beacon Pines. So how did we do? Beacon Pines took me 8.2 hours to complete, which is pretty standard because it's basically an on-rails kind of guided story. But if you've watched all the way to the end here, you've probably noticed that this video is quite a bit longer than the normal length that I aim for, kinda 20 to 30 minutes summarizing the game. But with a game that's so on rails and so based on the story, I really had a hard time cutting anything more than what I did. And honestly, I cut out like so much character information, so much side stuff, that I don't even know if you get a complete grasp of what the story is. I would really recommend playing this game if you are interested in getting involved with any more of the characters. But that being said, I don't know that I would recommend playing this game because kind of what you see is what you get. I feel like there are quite a few dead ends, which is fine, you know, it's a game about branching paths. You don't always need to see where every branch goes, but some of the branches were like very dead end, like just, you know, a couple screens and then it's done. And I would have liked some sections with more gameplay. I was kind of reading online about this game a little bit, and it seems like a lot of people theorize that some of the planned content was cut, which is always sad, but it is what it is. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed checking out this video. As always, please feel free to correct any of my misunderstandings about the story or my gripes or whatever in the comments, and you can also leave any suggestions for what you want to see me check out down there as well. And you know that I am keeping a list of all of the games submitted in the comments because this game and next week's game are both games that were submitted from the comments. So shout out to the people that recommended those. But as always, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next week as well. See you!